First off, let me just start by a couple of thank yous. Our central office folks, Amy and Mariana, the work that she put into this, Kim, Chris Lund, all of our directors, the principals and their efforts at the school level. A lot of time and energy goes into the development of a budget, and they're doing it in the eyes of a middle of a pandemic as well. So a little more pressure there, but they've done a great job. I also want to thank members of the FFO committee for their input. It's been a great collaborative effort and a great collaborative approach to our work. We started it, really got into it last year with looking at a lot of this data and using our workshop time to discuss and talk about the budget and the needs, and that's grown. So I appreciate the input that everyone and Board of Ed members have provided, and Board of Finance as well. And lastly, I just want to make sure, all board members today, you should have if you'd requested it, either received a hard copy of the binder with all the budget materials, as we do each year. We usually drop it on your seat or on your table in the board meeting room. We dropped it off to those that wanted a hard copy, and also the electronic copy should have gotten to you as well. So if anybody has any issues or can't open something, please, by all means, just let us know. So with that being said, let me just jump into our slides. We've got about 24, 25 slides I just want to run through. And I'm going to start basically with just identifying and mentioning those budget workshops. We had that first one on December 14th. And we also had a Board of Education meeting / second workshop on January 11th. And there's where that collaboration and that team effort comes into play. So what I'm presenting to you tonight, Board of Ed members, is basically everything that you've seen, and where the numbers stand and what our requests are. So I just found this quote from Henry Ford. Coming together is a beginning and keeping together is progress, but working together is success. And I feel like that continues to grow between administration and Board of Ed, and now Board of Finance coming into play too. So thank you for that. We appreciate it. As we think about, and we're going to start off just talking about this current fiscal year. Okay, not next year, but the current fiscal year, and some of our identified problem statements. So when we were building our budget last year and getting prepared to present to the Board of Finance, we had some identified problems that we had brought forward to them in request of funding to help support those problems and get them fixed for this year. So just want to circle back on that. And there was three major ones that we're just going to talk briefly about. First one being COVID protocols. Required adjustments to our in-school instruction. Two was the instructional technology assistance that was required to implement and support a digital infrastructure. And then the third, you can see, to best enhance student learning, existing classroom protocols needed to be modified by teachers and by staff, to enhance online instruction. So let's dive into this first one right here, number one. We're going to just talk about number one first. So the problem, as I just identified, COVID protocols required adjustments to in-school instruction. Well, we established what we thought what would be a solution to that, and then we wanted to report on what the outcome of that was. So the solution to that first problem for this year was basically we needed to establish a new infrastructure for both hybrid and virtual Viking to meet the needs of all students, with high-speed internet working, both at home and at school. We did that. We upgraded the middle school, we upgraded the high school, and our elementary schools were set. In the process of getting central office, our last building, up to speed with the wireless infrastructure. Additionally, devices. Within a very short period of time, the start of this year until December 15th, we deployed 2,500 student devices, 550 teacher and paraprofessional devices, laptops, 300 document cameras, and 250 pairs of headphones. Again, all by December 15th, rolled out an entire mobile deployment of devices for our students and staff, and got that up and running in a very short period of time. A lot of work and a lot of effort, went into making that happen, and it was needed. And we have to thank, the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance for allowing us the funding in this year's current budget to be able to do that. So there's that outcome. That's done. Devices are in the hands of kids, and they are using them. The second problem solution outcome. So that second problem that I identified, instructional technology assistance was required to implement and support a digital infrastructure. So our solution to that problem, basically, now that we've got devices in the hands of kids, devices in the hands of staff, that we needed an instructional technology coach, and we needed support to help implement and monitor, all the software, the usage, of those instructional supplies and supports. So additionally, we needed to establish that distance learning help desk for parents, which we put into place. So the outcome from all of that and that effort was the fact that we put the instructional technology coach in place and is now monitoring the effectiveness of the implemented supports, and also monitoring the tickets to that help desk usage and making sure we're being responsive to that usage. So we had our problem that was identified. We have our solution, and then our outcome as to what happened this year to make that happen. And then the last one, the third one. To best enhance student learning, existing classroom protocols, in this pandemic and hybrid model needed to be modified to enhance, online instruction and through remote learning as well. So our solution that we identified, and we've talked about this at some of our workshops already, the development of that job-embedded professional learning model, at the building level, and then the outcome being able now to provide ongoing support, and continue to track changes in teacher practice and the direct impact that's going to happen, on student learning, while also identifying what the gaps are going to be. And we're going to talk about, our concern with where and what those gaps might be as we look at next year across all grade levels. So when we also think about the current fiscal year, and I've said it already a couple of times, but I wanted to make sure we captured it in a slide. We have to thank you Board of Education members and the Board of Finance members, for their support. Those are big dollars that we were able to bring forward to be able to purchase all of those devices and make this happen as it pertains to online learning and use of either remote or being, in school, a blended learning component to be successful. So thank you for that. Additionally, just so with one last piece on the current fiscal year, district achievements, today we want to highlight a couple of these. We talked briefly about them during some of our workshops, but it's been basically the best of the worst scenarios. We opened up in the hybrid model in this first box, and although we wanted to be moving to full in-person learning back in by the beginning of October or mid-October, we know it just doesn't happen, and that's something we continue to talk about, but we have been successful in reopening and managing that hybrid model. We've also been very successful in developing and implementing a K-4 completely virtual Viking program where you've got over 400 students really in their own school with their own teachers and being successful in that manner. Ongoing district cohorting work. The cohorting work has been immense. It's been over 760 cohort changes to date, as well as the creation and implementation of that distance learning help desk that I mentioned, and an successful extended school year last summer, the implementation that Kim Davis and company brought forward, not knowing, if wearing masks was even going to work. She jumped in and really did a nice job getting that program off the ground last summer and making it successful. All wrapped around, continued student engagement and growth, through an uncertain time period is really what we've been engaging in. So now let's talk about next year, the 21-22 school year. And we want to start off with what's basically our problem as we think about next year. Well, it's very simple to state that our students have endured such disruption to this current school year, really for over the last year, and for a chunk of what will be potentially much of the rest of this year. Significant disruption, and it's brought forth concerns with gaps, as I mentioned just a minute ago, that are going to surface, needed student support services that are going to come into play, whether it be SEL and social and emotional supports or academic supports, and ensuring adult to student ratios remain appropriate, especially at those elementary level classes, those K-2, especially and K-3, where we need to make sure we are supporting every one of those children at an independent level. So, a collaborative effort between the Board of Ed, administration staff, all of us is really required, to ensure that those gaps are diminished as quickly as possible, and students can get back to achieving the way that they do in the Eastline Public Schools. So priorities. So we had brought forward during our two workshops some priorities that we discussed. We went back and kind of reassessed those. We got some feedback from board members. We talked about them at FFO. We've revamped those priorities into 5 priorities here. I won't read them specifically as you can see them here, but as we think about next year, I mentioned a couple of times now the achievement gaps, especially in math, because we're requesting, and these are tied to our requests for staffing. We want the math coaches, elementary and that middle school math coach, but we want to identify achievement gaps in math, and also begin to focus on those high needs versus non-high needs students. We're going to talk a little bit about those in just a few minutes. Priority 2, the social and emotional supports and special education supports and student support services across all grade levels. Extremely important as we look at the mental health of our students and our staff and ensuring that we're supporting those areas. Making sure that blended learning experience and environment and work continues. We have devices now in the hands of kids. The last thing we will do is put them on the shelf after COVID is gone and there might not necessarily be a need for remote learning anymore. We need to make sure those are continued to be used and brought forth in that blended learning experience for all of our kids. 4th, maintaining class sizes and staying within those board established guidelines. Very important as we look at next year for where the needs of students will be. And then lastly, really identifying a district-wide pre-K to 22 kind of a baseline regarding what the impact from this year has done on our instructional model. And it's kind of like that, what we don't know, for next year, we need to be prepared for and identify a baseline. And you'll notice I said pre-K to 22. The law has changed where we need to support students, in our AIM program, the 18 to 22 year program used to be age 21. Now it goes to age 22, right up until the last day of their 21st birthday when they turn 22. So those are our 5 priorities that we're going to be focusing on, and you'll see those tied into our requests in just a minute. So let's talk quickly about the budget analysis, where we started from. We went over and through these during our workshops that we had. We started off with a preliminary budget of 2.63 over the current fiscal year. We sat with the principals, we reviewed their budgets, we made reductions. We cut out $316,888 and brought it down to 2%. Then we looked at what our unanticipated expenses were for this year, and some of those to the tune of needing a special education teacher at Flanders School, IT support, extra custodial support. We had the retroactive paraprofessional salaries and the addition of some paraprofessional support, just to name a few. So that bumped our 2% back up to 2.76% with the addition of $383,000. Then through our workshops, we talked about what our needs and requests, those primary needs and requests are for next year. And we're going to highlight those in just a minute, but that increased by $730,000, bringing us up to 4.19. And then through some back and forth and reductions, we've brought it down to our final percent request that we're presenting and talking about tonight of 4.05 over the current fiscal year. So let's get into what's driving this number, the 4.05, and this increase of $730,000. And this is it. And this is nothing new that you haven't already seen, our Board of Ed members and those that were part of our workshops. The request for that 1.0 high school social worker, the request for the certified occupational therapy assistant, 2 elementary math coaches, 1 middle school math coach, the addition of 6 paraprofessionals, 2 additional kindergarten teachers, and 2 additional grade 2 teachers. We're going to break each one of those down now, and we're going to start with the high school social worker and looking at the problem, the solution, and what we want our outcome to be as we think about next year and share some data as it pertains to some of that those requests too. So I'm going to turn it over to Kim Davis, and Kim, I'm going to have you talk about the high school social worker. Okay?
Okay, sure. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for letting us provide you with some insight into our thinking and rationale. As you know, the social worker and a social worker at the high school, we always had the goal of having 2 full-time social workers, and we've brought this position forward. I think this will be our 4th year, but I think in light of our pandemic situation. We even have more urgency around this position because we know that the adolescent years are a time when mental health can really blossom, unfortunately, for some students if there's a predisposition. And we have a lot of needs. We see that through the cohort requests of students with social emotional / mental health situations that, parents are looking for more support, more structure, someone to talk to and work with on behalf of their students. So the National Association of School Social Workers recommends a ratio of 1 to 250 social workers per student. We currently have a ratio of 1 to over 900, or what our current enrollment rate is now at East Lyme High School. Our current social worker balances her workload between our therapeutic program, which is for students who have an disability. And really, our goal is to devote half of her work week to that therapeutic program and half of her work week to the general education student body at the high school. And then ultimately, this additional position would also support the general education student body at the high school. So, we're looking for someone. Social workers provide clinical counseling. They're trained in a different way than school psychologists and school counselors. So they are a different position, even though we have a wonderful group of employees who currently are working to support students. A social worker comes at that support from a different angle. So we, very much feel that this would be an important role at this time. If we want to go to the next slide, what we know is happening right now in our high school building is that so far, as you know, we've shared with you before that we keep sort of a log, a spreadsheet of crisis incidents at all 3 levels, elementary, middle, and high school. But for this conversation, the high school and the middle school information I wanted to share as well, because obviously it includes some 8th grade data and they'll be moving up to the high school. You can see that there have been 35 crisis incidents to date at the high school. That's a larger number than, or that's about half. So we're trending about the same, but they're different. They're requiring 211 and, mobile crisis support services. And, we know that those kinds of things need follow-up. They're not just something that happen on one day. And so a social worker can follow up with families and students upon return to school to support ongoing progress and care. Our current social worker has a caseload of about 48 students, which is a combination of IEP, 504, and general education students. So they can, the IEP students stay pretty static with her, but the 504 and general education students, depending on need or situation, can ebb and flow at any one given time. And of course, she's also someone who can respond in a crisis if needed. And then both of our middle school and high school social workers serve students in our AIM program. That's the 18 to 22. We have to get used to saying now. That was passed over the summer, that students can stay with the school district until the day before their 22nd birthday. And those young adults often have other, the need for counseling through the school-based model. And so we have both the high school and the middle school social worker sharing that caseload. And so with one social worker at the high school, the guidance counselors and the school psychologists provide a large amount of time per week to crisis intervention. And, as I just mentioned, all 3 disciplines have, varying roles, and we'd like to see, less interruption and more consistent services in each of their areas of expertise for students. So that's why we feel like adding the high school social worker is really critical at this point. Are there any questions about that? I think I was probably talking a little fast.
Kim, it's Jamie. Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
So when I had a youth coalition meeting this week, and we were discussing the drug and alcohol counselor.
Yep.
And how that person is terribly, terribly busy. And the youth coalition picks up their summer paycheck kind of deal.
Okay.
Is there any talks of adding more hours to that person's schedule or adding another person since they are so busy?
No, we hadn't talked about it from the Project Courage point of view, Jamie. With a contracted individual, we were hoping to add, an employee basically full-time for that. But certainly I can talk with Deb and see what kind of feedback we're getting there. I know that our current person is great. She's actually just been on several PPT meetings with me lately for a student, and her knowledge and background is extremely helpful when you're dealing with a student who has those substance abuse concerns. This would be a wider view, obviously, but we can certainly explore, that partnership between the Youth Coalition and, the person in the building and what they're providing.
I know, because I know I've said this multiple times, one social worker is not enough.
Yeah.
I'd like to see our social worker actually staffed at the correct ratio levels, but I'll take one.
Yeah.
I'd like more, but I'll take the one. Thanks, Kim.
Right. Sure. All righty. So I think I'm still up next. We have the Certified Occupational Therapy Assistant, the CODA. And so this person is really we have 3 full-time OTs, occupational therapists in the district, and 1 CODA currently. And they cover obviously multiple buildings. And the current caseload for the OT that's assigned to middle school and Nyack Center is at 101 students, from direct service to consultation. It's a wide range, but that's a lot of students. The American Occupational Therapy Association, which is the national professional organization of OTs and CODAs, recommends 40 to 50 students, depending on the need and the intensity of the students' programming. So, you can see that our one person is carrying double her professional organization's amount of services, and that leads to service interruption, combining students into larger groups if they need to make up time, and just an uneven level of care, and that's not appropriate. Occupational therapy is for students who have either a special education plan, so an IEP, or a 504 plan. Both are legal documents that once that service is written on there, we need to follow through and provide that at the levels that are written. So what we'd like to do is hire a CODA, because the Certified Occupational Therapy Assistant, it does all the duties of the OT except the evaluation. They can set goals for students. They certainly can treat students. They can attend PPT, IEP meetings. And so the time will be 100% pretty much spent with kids. They will have some PPT responsibility, but it's a way to inject more time directly with kids, at a lesser cost than an occupational therapist. So we added one for Haynes and preschool, I think 2 years ago now, and it's been such a success. And what you're seeing happen is just that, we have kids with intensive needs moving up to middle school. And so between middle school and Nyack Center, it's just a really large group. I would recommend this person is just at the middle school to avoid travel. And again, that provides more consistency of service. And then the OT will maintain her caseload at Nyack Center and then travel between the 2 buildings. So you can.
Thanks, Kim. Appreciate it. All right, let's jump into the elementary and middle school math coaches, and I'm going to turn it over to Amy, who's going to talk about math coaches and share a little data as it pertains to our requests here. So Amy?
Sure. So I know most of you are aware of our current problem in regards to mathematics at both the elementary and middle school level. As stated, our problem is the fact that a portion of our grade 3 to 8 students are not meeting or exceeding on the state standardized mathematics test, and a portion of them not meeting is not acceptable to us and not acceptable to the community. We really feel like we want all of our grades 2 students being able to meet and or grow towards that target. So that's a problem for us. The other piece is we only have 1 math coach, as you know, across our 3 buildings. So our capacity is a problem. The fact that we only have 1 person spread thin. And then the other problem that we stated is we don't have a math coach at all at the middle school. So not even having the staff member there in order to offer the interventions and or the additional supports to teachers in order to meet those targeted needs. So we really came up with 2 solutions. The first is to bring forth 3 additional math coaches to provide building-based interventions to students to close our achievement gaps. Those 3 additional math coaches would be 2 at the elementary level and 1 at the middle school level. And not only would these coaches provide intervention for our students, because again, we want highly qualified adults working with our students, but they would also be able to teach our teachers research-based mathematical instructional practices at both the elementary and middle school level that would really help us strengthen what we call our tier 1 instruction, which is our core instruction, the instruction that all of our students get as those foundational learning experience. So we're really, the stronger that we make that foundational piece, the better it is for our students in the long run. So our solution is hoping that our math coaches would help our teachers as well. The outcome really looking at, and the board has really committed to looking at growth over time. And we have an interesting hiccup with this because we didn't have the state assessment last year. And we are green light right now for the standardized assessment this year. We'll see how that's executed and what it looks like there. But we did raise ourselves and challenge ourselves to be able to achieve at least a 90% growth rate as assessed by our state standardized assessments. And we put it for 2 years, just not sure in regards to what we're going to get really, because we're talking about administering the standardized test remotely. We're talking about some on site and what that data looks like. But I think one of the things we've heard loud and clear that the board wants to support growth over time. And we need to ensure that every child at their beginning point is growing at a rate that is something that we support and moves our students within the right direction. So Jeff, if you go to the next slide. So one of the points that I wanted to bring, because the board has mentioned this quite a few times, is it just continues to hone in on our trends. So one of the questions, and actually we were just asked it during the Salem board meeting, is this a trend over time? Or is this sort of an anomaly? And the reality is, we've had math trends over time consistently. And it's been an area that we know that we need to hone in on. And, if we look at the standardized assessment, and you'll notice here I highlighted 4 years in a row. The one disclaimer I'd like to just make sure, as you look at the chart, is when you look at, say, 3rd grade and you look across 3rd grade, you're looking at 4 different 3rd grades and where we achieve and what percentage we can get students to. So the 15-16 grade 3 is a different group of students than the 16-17 grade 3. But what we're trying to present here is just to let you know that it is a trend, that we have not reached that higher end marker that we'd like to see, where we'd like to be able to come back and say to the town, the majority of our students are meeting it, and those who are not, or all of our students are meeting those growth targets. So we wanted to just sort of reinforce to you that we're trying to address a trend here, not just something that is just coming up and we're feeling like we need to be reactive to it. We're rather trying to be intentional with it. And Jeff, if you could go to the next slide. The other point that we wanted to bring up, and this is something that our board is really honing in and trying to look at, is our high needs performance versus our non-high needs. So what I did here is I included a graph that our board has mentioned and or brought up in regards to just our math performance the last time our students completed the standardized test. And what I'd like to do is just draw your attention to the green circle, which is non-high needs students. And then you'll notice the yellow or orangish circle, I should say, which is high needs students. And I'm going to just quickly draw your attention to the language at the bottom with the high needs, where high needs we need to remember are students with disabilities, English learners, as well as students that are eligible for free and reduced lunch. All those students together make up that yellow circle that you see there. And what the State Department does is they provide us with this visual, which is excellent, so that we can see what's the performance of those students in that cohort versus all of the other students' performance. And one of the things that's really uncomfortable to our board as well as to ourselves is there's a gap there. You can see it visually. You can see that our yellow and our high need students are performing more in the low performance, low growth, whereas our non-high need students are performing in that high performance, low growth, which again, you'll notice that growth, which is why the board and ourselves are trying to look for increased growth over time. So again, just trying to show you on the data, the problem and the trend, And what we're trying to solve by really gaining additional supports for our students as well as our staff, and just continue to make our instruction as high quality as it possibly can for you as taxpayers, as well as you as a Board of Education to be proud of.
Thanks, Amy. Appreciate it.
Amy, I have a question. This is Tim. This graphic is really, really good. I was wondering, the size of the circle is proportional to the number of
Students.
kids in it. It would be interesting to see what the range, the actual data range would look like. So I suspect, if you had all the data points for everybody plotted there, I suspect that it would be, again, very interesting, especially with the yellow one, to see how low it goes on the growth side.
Okay.
Yeah. So anyway, that's just a thought.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim.
Thank you.
Can I
All
chime
right,
in with one suggestion?
Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely.
Barry.
Yeah.
If you compare this to the previous chart on page 17, page 17, you're going to get some potential pushback because you're just dealing with the performance index at level 3 and 4 and not a growth index. And there's an argument that not every student in the district is going to be able to achieve the performance level 3 and 4. That's why the State Department advocates for tracking the growth index. Now, if you change the chart on page 17 to a growth index chart, which is a percentage of students that met their growth target, as opposed to the percentage of students that met the performance target. They're two different measures. And I think you'd get a better indication for what's happening in the district. And it's in line with what the state advocates for, is that if page 17 use the growth chart as opposed to the performance chart.
I have the growth chart. That's easy for me to do.
Okay.
Mhm.
Thanks, Barry. Okay. I can't see anybody, so hopefully that's it for questions for right now. So I'm going to move forward to additional paraprofessionals. And Kim, I'm going to have you come back on the line and just talk about our needs here as we look at the increase in paras.
Sure. So what I'm looking for over time is stability in our paraprofessional workforce, basically. And so what happens is right now, well, and every year, but some years more than others, we have students with disabilities who transition between our specialty programs, obviously between buildings, right? As fourth graders age into fifth grade, as eighth graders age into ninth, and preschoolers coming up to kindergarten. And what we've done is, develop a really strong cadre of staff related to that specialty program who has a skill set and a knowledge base and a relationship with the teachers and staff in a building, so that when a student moves up, we are reluctant to always just send a para with them for two reasons. A, you lose that infrastructure you've built in the program, and B, right now, what we're finding is there is a younger student moving into their slot. So we really can't lose the person at the younger age, and we're growing in the older ages. So this year specifically, we have several students moving from middle school to high school, but we have students coming up from elementary to middle. So we need to sort of expand the cadre at the high school program, which is not unusual because we've been seeing this steady growth of intense students moving through the elementary years. And I can talk about that a little more in a second. Additionally, we have several students this year too that were new, not new to the district. By that, I mean new in their IEP need for a one-to-one paraprofessional. And right now we're covering those students with what I like to call building-based paras from Lily B. Haynes. So those building-based paras are not attached to our autism program or our therapeutic learning program. They support the building of Lily B in general, which means they could be providing tiered intervention support, they can be providing generalized classroom support, or they could be providing support for IEP needs that are outlined for individual students in a class. And when we move them into a one-to-one para mode, then their scope obviously is more narrow. And so the building, in a sense, sort of is reduced in their flexibility to move that person around or cover more students or provide more tiered intervention. So what I'm trying to do is not take from one program in order to benefit another. And so that's where we have a need at the elementary level. And so then, and we also have a student who is on track to return from an out of district placement, which is great because we'll save on the tuition and the transportation dollars, but we do need to hire a para as an appropriate support tool for that student. So that would be part of this budget request as well. So Jeff, if you want to go ahead to the next slide. I think I've touched a little bit on this, but just more specifically, those 3 students at Haynes that are currently being covered by building paras. And so we want them to have the maximum flexibility to support students as Melissa, and her team take a look at what's needed for students, especially coming back from, what we hope will be a full typical 5-day school week for students next year. And knowing that, they've been experiencing this disruption as we've outlined, we want to provide, all the support opportunities we can to close those gaps. The second bullet speaks to the level of intensity that we've seen lately. In the last 5 years, we've had an increase in our students who are identified under the autism category for special education. Over 5 years, it's been a 15 student total increase. I used an example at the workshop that when I joined the district, like approximately, I think 12 years ago, we had 1 elementary program that serves students on the autism spectrum, and it had 3 students. We now have 3 programs at the elementary level, including preschool. So we have a preschool program and 2 elementary programs. And next year, each of the elementary programs will have 8 students, and preschool will have anywhere from 3 to 5 as we start the school year. So that's, pretty significant growth in that area. And those students need support with their communication in the form of a communication device like an iPad with a specialized app. They require supports for behavioral intervention and learning to learn skills, as well as specialized academic instruction to progress in those areas. And I mean, a shout out to those programs. They're doing an amazing job. So we just have to acknowledge that that has been an area of growth for us in the world of special education. And then we have our 2 students moving from middle school to high school. So we need to be able to provide that staff. And finally, our student returning from an out of district placement. So.
Thanks, Kim. Appreciate it. When we just lastly talk about, let's talk about the additional elementary teachers. So back at the beginning of the presentation, we talked a little bit about, K and kindergarten and not knowing, what we're going to see for kindergarten numbers. A lot of parents, we think, held back their students and didn't send them to kindergarten this year due to the pandemic. So we're we're anticipating a bit of a higher influx of K students starting, next year. So that's really our problem. When we look at birth rates, 5 years ago, they were average. They weren't, anything that was outlandish or high. They actually were on a little bit of the lower side. But with that being said, we've had other years where we've seen lower birth rates, the 5 years previous, but the kindergarten numbers were high for the incoming year. So that's a concern. We want to be prepared for that. We cannot, and we don't want to get into that issue or that situation of having to hire additional teachers outside of the operating budget, which causes a problem for the next year's budget and costs. So we're looking at the addition of 2 kindergarten teachers to help offset that. Class sizes in grade 2 at Flanders and Lily B. Haynes remain high. This, as you probably remember, is the cohort of students. They started off their kindergarten with higher numbers. They're in 1st grade now, but going to 2nd grade next year, we feel, they're sitting at that top end of the guidelines, the very top end of the guidelines. And we'll show you the numbers in just a second. But that's a cohort that needs some support, and we want to make sure we're able to intervene with all of those students. So we feel the need to incorporate in 2 additional teachers, one at Flanders and one at Lily B. Haynes, which balances out the numbers of 15 per class at all 3 schools in grade 2 next year. I'll show you that in just a sec. So again, hire the recommended number of additional teachers as a solution in the outcome, be able to provide that appropriate level of service, intervention, and instruction, to support those students. Let's take a look at the class size numbers for next year as we think about that. Again, What we did was, we put the guidelines in here. So you can see on the far left, these are all the recommended guidelines as you look K to 4. Projected 21-22 enrollment. Here we have the projected enrollment with homeschooling students returning. So those, we have a count of how many students were homeschooled this year, just due to the pandemic. So we can see, with those students returning, and then the projected average class size off of that, and the total teacher count over here for each class. So I'll kind of draw your attention here to that grade 2. The guidelines are 18 to 20, and this is Lily B. Haynes. 18 to 20. If we didn't add the teacher, it'd be at 20.7 for next year. Adding the teacher would put it at 15, an average of 15.5, with 4 teachers rather than 3. You can see Niantic Center grade 2, 15.3 next year with 3 teachers. And then the same thing at Flanders, you would see grade 2 would drop it to 15 rather than 20. So it would have 4 teachers. There are a few other anomalies, within here. I mean, we're a little concerned about this number right here with, projected grade 3 next year of potentially being, an average class size of 23. That's beyond those guidelines. So that's something that we're watching very carefully and having conversations about still. And it might be a situation where maybe our grade 2 numbers are lower at Lily B. Haynes. And we look at, they're higher at grade 3. Things fluctuate. So we might have to have some movement internally within schools. But just wanted to share out the projected class sizes. You can take a look at these in more detail as they're on your Board of Ed members, are on your slides. And this is posted in board docs for the public. And then fixed costs and fixed expenses. We try to show this slide every year. This fixed expense number continues to go up. It was 96% roughly and changed last year. Our fixed expenses are salaries, employee benefits, tuition, transportation, and a lot of our operating expenses along the utilities, lease, insurance. It makes up a combined 97.2% of our entire roughly $52 million operating budget. The things that we can play with, the supplies, textbook, software, a 2.8, a small slice of that pie. And then just wanted to lastly show our per pupil expenditure slide. East Lyme is sitting at an $18,024 per pupil expenditure. And you can see kind of where we land in the middle, and many of these districts that are up here, their per pupil expenditure is higher. District or 18 is Lyme Old Lyme with 22,000. In these times, if you toe to toe with scores, we're higher in many score areas against those districts, but we're spending less dollars across our district and getting a more bang for our buck. So we just wanted to share out a little bit of the ranking and kind of some of our area towns around us as to where they stand with their per pupil expenditures versus ours. And with that, I want to just thank everybody for their ongoing support, and once again, to the Board of Ed and the Board of Finance, for what they provided us for the opportunities for this year and the work we'll collaboratively do moving into next year.